Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with our level 29.9, almost level 30 character, Impulse Storm, and we are on the Uberman story arc, I believe. Yep, from our Ashwin Lannister. Is it Ashwin? Yeah. So we're going to continue this story arc, and as always, we will have a Scrapper rant, or at least a conversation of what we're going to um, we're going to be talking about, role-playing games. In this case, again, D&D, because that's the game I'm still currently playing, much to my chagrin, because I'd honestly rather play something like Savage Worlds. Um, but in any case, this is not about my game. It's about something I read on a Reddit post or forum. I think it was D&D Beyond. So this guy makes a post. He wants to leave a campaign because he's not enjoying it. Fair enough. My best friend left a number of campaigns before settling on the 5, including mine, that he is now playing in. And I have no doubt that he would leave my campaign if I had said we're switching to Savage Worlds, because he wants to play 5e, D&D. So, there are lots of valid reasons to leave a campaign, and if you aren't having any fun in the campaign, and especially if the campaign is not full of people who are your existing friends, but you're just playing with them to play D&D and you're not having any fun, then, obviously it makes sense to leave the campaign. And in the post, he was asking, he feels bad, right, that he's kind of letting down the other players. I think maybe he's in a group of 3 or 4, so he feels like, well, there won't be enough players to finish the campaign as we started it because I'm leaving and I'm kind of leaving them high and dry, and my character won't be there to, tank or heal or whatever his character does. And I would say to that issue, if you're not having any fun, go ahead and leave the campaign. Don't worry about the people who are left behind not being able to finish. First of all, that's probably unlikely. They'll figure out a way to soldier on, right? I mean, I've had this experience many times where somebody walked away from a campaign of mine, usually for things like we're graduating and going to college, right? And although we missed having them around, yeah, we found a way to continue on. We never stopped playing because somebody left the game. We always found somebody else to play with or played with fewer people. It really wasn't a big deal. When I started my Champions campaign when I was in college, I had 2 friends of mine from high school who played it with me, and it was me and 2 people. And we ran, I think, 3 scenarios with just the 3 of us, 2 players, right, 2 PCs, and me. And I had like a, not a GM PC, but a permanent, a permanent NPC that like to help them out in combat and stuff, and to cover some of the skills that they didn't have, and that sort of thing. It was a gadgeteer, so she could kind of be a jack of all trades, and she had gadgets to cover all the things that they couldn't do with their 2 powers. One guy was a brick, the other guy was sort of an energy projector, and they also didn't have a lot of sort of generic skills. So I made up this skill-based NPC, and when a 3rd character came in who was a martial artist and had some of those skills, I just, she had martial arts, I just rarely had her use them, and we leveled up because I didn't want to step on his toes, and she's just the NPC, and so on. So, we lived. When all my friends graduated from high school and went to college, and I was left behind, I found 2 other high school guys, and we played a game, right? And when one of those 2 guys, then 3 guys, graduated from high school and went to college, the next state over, and couldn't play with us anymore, we found another high school guy to play with us. So, I would say if you're actually having an issue and you're not having fun in a game, it is not your obligation to make sure the people who you would leave behind if you quit the game are still having fun. I applaud this person's concern because it shows some level of appreciation for other people, consideration for other people, and I think that that is a valid thing to think about, but there is no point in making yourself miserable week in and week out. This guy's been playing in the campaign for like 2 years, and he's just not having fun anymore. And if that's what's happening, then it's not a problem if you bail out. I mean, like, it might upset them, but they'll get over it and they'll figure out how to play without you. It's just not, nobody is that critical to the game. Now, it might offend or upset people, hurt their feelings. I mean, it could, and only you know your game group and how they're going to react to something like this. But I would submit to you, we're going to get to the details of this guy's story, by the way, which is going to make me take a little of it back. But if we're just approaching this from the generic standpoint of you're in a campaign that you're not enjoying and you don't want to play anymore because it's not fun, let us bring up Colville's quote. Matt Colville's quote is, "No D&D is better than bad D&D. Not playing at all is better than playing in a bad game." And so if he's in bad D&D, he's better off with no D&D. And the other thing I would say is, if he's really that unhappy, there's a very high probability that he's going to end up decreasing, not intentionally, of course, but decreasing the enjoyment of the other people who are enjoying the game and liking it, right? Through his behavior, which I will say, after he described it, is highly problematic, right? His problematic behavior will end when he leaves the game, and his behavior is problematic because he's not having any fun, although I would suggest, again, based on the story we're going to get into, his problematic behavior is why he's not having any fun. That's another whole story. So, in this particular person's case, I think he'll do himself and the group a dramatic amount of good by just walking away. But even if you're not being a problem player the way I think this guy may have been, you still, it's very hard while you're role-playing your character to role-play that you yourself are having fun. And if you aren't having fun, and if it will become obvious. I mean, in my friend's Candlekeep game, which I never once considered quitting, it never even occurred to me, right? I will admit that I wasn't having a great deal of fun. And I've talked on this channel before about why that is, and some of it had to do with I was playing a character that I just didn't feel a connection to and didn't really want to roleplay. I just couldn't get into her. And to this day, I still don't really 100% know why, but I couldn't. Some of it stemmed from the fact that I, as a guy who had been GMing, didn't want to steal the spotlight while I was a player or make people think that I was trying to sort of co-GM with my friend. So I shut up a little bit more than normal, which meant that sometimes when I wanted to make a comment with my character, I kind of didn't. And, I was constantly sort of assessing, am I like backseat GMing here and stuff? And that's not an enjoyable way to experience the game. And I'm not sure if I'm ever going to not be able to do that, because I don't want to be a backseat GM. But if that was the only thing, then it wouldn't have been a problem. On top of that, I wasn't enjoying the character. And then finally, and I think this may have been the biggest issue, as I mentioned, I'm not going to get into this in long detail. You can watch the older episodes to hear about this. But this other friend of the GM, my friend, so my best friend's friend, John, had refused to play in my Rome campaign, and I didn't know why. And I was concerned that it was because there was something he didn't like about me and my personal behavior, even though he had very little interaction with me before he quit the Rome. He avoided the Rome game. And I was always monitoring myself, not only to make sure I wasn't GMing, or sort of backseat GMing, but also to see if I could make sure that I didn't piss off John. And that is not a fun way to experience D&D. So this constant second guessing of yourself, plus not enjoying a character that you're playing, I wasn't having any fun. Now, why is this relevant? Because although I was doing my best to not mess up the experience for anybody else, I got to level up here. Even though I was doing my best to do that, nevertheless, because he knows me really well, my best friend was able to detect that I was not having a blast playing his game. And he called me on it and asked me what the problem was. I seemed bored. I seemed uninterested. I didn't seem really into it. Do I not like this character? Maybe I should make a different character. Right? Now, this led to a separate almost argument where I said, well, I don't see the point of changing my character. This was late September because we're supposed to stop in a couple of weeks. And he said, well, actually, I'm going to run till December. So if you want a better character, a different character, you should make one. And that became an argument about, wait, who told you we were running until December? You don't get to make this decision arbitrarily. Well, yes, I am. I'm the DM, and so on. Right. But my point is, he sensed my lack of involvement in my lack of interest in the. I guess we're getting taunt here. He sensed my lack of interest in the campaign, which was partly, like, mostly he had nothing to do with, right? It was because there was another player in there that was making me feel uncomfortable. It was because my character was kind of making me feel uncomfortable in a way, and it was because I was making myself feel uncomfortable because I was trying not to backseat DM, and all of those things combined to make me sort of very quiet during the sessions. And I guess because I wasn't able to focus my full attention on the session, because I was constantly self-monitoring to make sure I didn't do something to piss off John or didn't backseat DM, I was disengaged. I wasn't fully engaged and immersed in the session, and he could see it. He could tell it. I don't know if there was some facial expression. I have no idea, but he just said I seemed supremely bored and completely uninterested in the session. And I said, no, that's not true. I'm interested in the adventure. And he said, look, if there's something you don't like, you got to tell me. And so, well, first of all, I'm not going to tell him, look, one of the things I don't like is this guy, John, that you've got us playing with. Not that I don't like John, but he's making me feel uncomfortable because of the previous interactions and because I don't know what I did, I did tell him I wasn't really feeling the character, and that's why he said maybe you should change it. But I said, well, even if we are going to go to December, I don't see the point of regenning a character for 3 or 4 sessions. I'll just kind of, grit my teeth and bear it. But gritting your teeth and bearing a session isn't the same thing as having a blast. And at least my best friend could tell that I wasn't having a great time. And at the same time, one of the other players, the newest to D&D, was playing a character she wasn't feeling either. And she wasn't into it either, and I could tell that she wasn't having the best time in the world. Now, when I questioned her about it, she said, I'm still having fun, but not as much fun in your game, right? She wasn't ready to bail out either. But now there are 2 players in this group who weren't having a great time. And it's just a group of 4 people when the person who went to Finland was in the process of moving for a couple of months. So that means half the players aren't having a blast. And it's really hard to hide that, right? Like, while I was role-playing my character that I wasn't really into, and trying to monitor myself not to, offend this John guy and not to take over the session and backseat GM, I was also trying, in a way, to role-play myself having fun when I wasn't. And let me tell you guys, it is damn hard to role-play a character in a game while you're role-playing yourself having fun so that people don't know that you aren't having fun. It's almost impossible to do it on a long-term basis, and that means that sooner or later it is going to come out. It is going to become apparent to the rest of the group that you aren't enjoying this game. And that's only if you're doing everything you can to hide that fact and, help people have fun and, not cause trouble. If you're someone who's going to, actually be legit miserable and act that way, then that's going to ruin it even faster and more completely. And so if you're not having fun in a game and you feel like you just want to stop playing, you should do that. Now, one of the things I would say is, if you have some fun at the game, or you remember you used to have fun and somehow things have changed so that you don't, maybe the GM implemented a new rule and you're not making the session enjoyable or what have you, if you really kind of want to stay in the group and you like the people but you're not enjoying the game, then the first thing you should do is address it with whoever can deal with it. If the other players are making you miserable for some reason, then you need to address it with them. In this case, the person was complaining about the game master not running a fun game. So the first thing you should do, if you're thinking that you might want to stay, and this player should have done this, I would think, except the story tells me otherwise, right? But under normal circumstances, not knowing the details of his case, I would say the first thing you would do is address the fact that you aren't having fun with the game master. Now, I probably maybe should have done that, one of the reasons I didn't address it, and when he said, "Do you want to make up a new character?" I said, "Nah," was because I knew we were in a temporary game, right? And I didn't see the point of trying to address these issues when I knew we were going to stop in December. Now, I also thought at one point that it was possible. I feel like I'm hearing a glowy. It was possible that when this John guy told us what I thought he was going to do, which he did, what he thought he was going to say, which he did do, when he told us, I don't want to go and play in Rome, that my friend wanted to play with him so badly that he might have said, well, let's stay in Candlekeep. And if we had actually had a group discussion the way I asked my friend to do when we had this sort of argument about, you know, whether we were going to stay and how long it was going to be before we went back to Rome, and I said, you need to ask the group. If we'd had a conversation, and if John had said, I don't want to go back to Rome, which he never said out loud to the group, he only said in private messages to my friend, and at one point I think he said it on the Discord, just one liner, no, I'm not interested, right? If he had said it verbally to the group, I would have said, to me, the group of players who want to play together matters more than the campaign. A campaign is just either physical or, in this case, digital pieces of paper, and human beings matter more than pieces of paper. And as a consequence, if it turns out that we want to keep playing with John, but he doesn't want to play in this campaign of mine, then we shouldn't play my campaign. Either keep playing Candlekeep or make up a new campaign. I can make up a new campaign. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened, because if John had said, well, I don't want to play with Scrapperlock being the GM, that would have told us everything we needed to know, right? But he always couched it as, I don't like the details of this campaign. I suspect, in order not to hurt my feelings, maybe not, I don't know. But if we had had that discussion then, I would have urged them that let's just bail on this campaign. Yeah, I know we all want to finish it, but it's more important to play with the people we want to play with than worry about finishing a campaign. Now, I didn't personally really want to play with John because he made me feel weird because of the interaction we'd had. But if the other players all wanted to play with John, then, we should have kept playing with him. That never happened because my best friend just decided, nope, at the end of December, not just I'm stopping Candlekeep, but we're going back to Rome. Right? Whereas I would have said I could make up a different campaign, guys. Of course, I also would have said it won't be DnD, and they would have probably said no to that. Right? So you kind of can't win sometimes, but again, I think people matter more than campaigns or characters. And I would have been willing to scratch my whole campaign, even though we were like 2/3 of the way done with it, and I really wanted to see how it ended, and do something else. Or let somebody else GM. Maybe one of the other guys could have GM'd or something like that, right? And keep my best friend's good friend in the game. But we didn't do that, right? So anyway, it was a temporary game. If John had said, well, I don't want to play Rome, and my best friend had said, all right, well, we'll just keep doing Candlekeep. You guys are only 4th level. There's 16 levels to go. We'll just, there's 17 more adventures or something in Candlekeep. We'll just keep playing Candlekeep. At that point, I would have said, okay, we're going to have to make some changes in order for me to have a good time. And one of them minimally would have been, I need a new character. Right? We need to ditch this character, and I need to make up a new one. Right? So, if it had become a long-term thing, I would have addressed it. I'm not sure how I would have addressed the whole John thing, because I know my best friend would have probably been very upset by the fact that I wasn't having a good time with his friend because of the way the friend made me feel, and my interactions with John. He seems, at least as non-confrontational as I am. I doubt he's ever going to tell me the truth personally, or anyone the truth about why he really didn't want to play my game, because I think he doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I guess he thinks he might hurt mine if he told me the truth. That's my guess. I think he's just too polite. And sometimes you just need the truth, because maybe it's no big deal and it really is just the campaign, and then it wouldn't matter and I wouldn't need to feel uncomfortable. But that probably would have had to be straightened out at some point too. And I guess what I would have probably tried to do to avoid any sort of unpleasant confrontations is, let me see if I can change up characters and play somebody I like better. And when I'm not worrying about not being the backseat GM because I'm not GMing anymore, and when I'm not worrying about the character, when I'm enjoying the character, maybe the whole John thing blows over. But my point is, you should try to address it when possible with the game master. If the game master is doing stuff that makes the game not fun for you, we go back to the fun bully stuff. I'm not talking about that you don't like the way the game master runs counterspell. That's a single rule, and that if that single rule is making D&D not be fun for you, you need to go and seek help because that's ridiculous. It's just a game mechanic. And individual game mechanics, isolated game mechanics that only come up a couple of times a session shouldn't be enough to make you not have fun playing D&D at all. Okay? So we're not talking about that. But if the GM is doing stuff that isn't fun for you, like, oh, he's making a bunch of puzzles and I don't like puzzles, or there's too much talky and I want some action in combat, or what have you, then you can address it with the GM or maybe the rest of the group and possibly see it get addressed. And so I think the first step is always to see if you can get it addressed. But if you can't get it addressed, or if it's something that you don't think they'll address for some reason, like my best friend with this guy, John, I mean, I know he wouldn't have booted him out of the game, right? So if it's something like I just can't have fun playing with this other person in the group, and the group is going to keep him around, well, then that can't be addressed, and you might have to leave. Another guy I know, he runs an in-person game, and I've mentioned he has this woman, Mandy, playing in his group, and the rest of the players are guys. And this one guy that's friends with the DM asked, "Can I play in your game?" They're all playing at this game cafe, and he's seen the game running, and it looks like fun. And so the DM said, "Sure." And I guess this guy is very sort of shy and awkward and introverted, and not good around women. And I guess he makes awkward approaches or what have you. And so I guess he said and did some things that this woman, Mandy, who's apparently very attractive, found offensive, right? And, sexist, whatever, I don't know. She didn't like them. And so she kind of said, it's him or me, right? And he asked me, what do you do? What do I do here? I don't know what to do. What would you do here? And I said, well, some of it would depend. If Mandy's being unreasonable, I think I might tell her you're being unreasonable. But if she has some justification for it, if she's not being unreasonable, my feeling is that it's first come, first serve, and she's been playing in your game for 6 months, and this guy is new, and it's up to the new guy to fit into the existing group, not the existing group to fit into the new guy. And so I would basically have to tell him you can't come back. And so he said, well, I asked her if she could try him for one more session, and we'll see what happened. And then what actually happened is this awkward guy, I did some stuff that even the DM was like, yeah, I saw that was inappropriate. And he basically told them, look, I can't keep you in the game anymore because you're offending the female player. And the guy was like, okay, fine. And he, didn't get mad, fortunately. Right. So, sometimes these things can be addressed and sometimes they can't socially. But, assuming you've attempted to address it, or you get the feeling that they won't address it, or that it can't be addressed, what have you, and you decide you want to leave, go ahead and leave. And I would say you shouldn't worry if that's going to leave the group high and dry. Their fun, once you leave that group, is not your responsibility. You're stewards of each other's fun when you're in a group together. But that doesn't include you having to stay in the group to be stewards of other people's fun at your own fun's expense. You're supposed to be having fun too, right? You're not supposed to be having fun in spite of or instead of the other players, but you're also not supposed to be making yourself miserable so that they can have fun. So if you're not having fun, and this guy wasn't having fun, go ahead and leave the group. So that's my general advice. But now let's talk about this guy, because I think the person who made this post is actually a problem player, and this has nothing to do with his dungeon master. What he said was that he doesn't like roleplay, and he kind of shuts down when they start roleplaying and doing the talky. And so one of the reasons he wants to leave the game is they do too much roleplaying. Okay. Now, okay, that's fair, but he doesn't, by his own admission, he's never really attempted to do any of the actual role-playing because he thinks it's kind of silly. Guys, I have a pretty good friend at work. She plays World of Warcraft. And she knows how to do the mechanics of role-playing games from that. And one of my other coworkers, who's the guy that actually set up this D&D group and then never really played with us, he said we should invite her. I think she'll be great once he found out she plays World of Warcraft. And I immediately said, I don't think so. Right? And the reason I said no is that I don't think she would take the role playing seriously. I would think she would think that the role playing parts where you're socializing and talking in character, I'm not talking about voices, I'm just saying speaking in character, saying what your character says, having your character get jealous of another character, that sort of stuff. She would think that that was weird and silly, and she wouldn't really want to do it. And as a result, when we're doing all that role play talkie stuff, she probably wouldn't like it. And when she talked to me about it, I told him I didn't think it would be a good idea, and I said, no offense to you, but this is what I think. That when we were actually doing stuff in character, you would think it was silly. And she said, it's true. She does think it's silly. She still can't understand how we can do that. She thinks it's weird. And she told me this just a few weeks ago. She can't picture, how can you do this with a dungeon master and all this and stuff instead of doing it on the computer? And I tried to describe it to her, and she just looked at me like I'm weird, right? So even though she plays a game like this, the idea of doing this in your imagination and actually role-playing out your character, because she doesn't do that, right? She talks out of character all the time in the game. But actually role-playing that your gnome is an actual gnome and trying to talk like a gnome and think like a gnome and react like a gnome, she doesn't understand that at all, and she wouldn't be down for doing it. And she would kind of think it was goofy and probably wouldn't participate in it when the rest of us were doing it. And it sounds like that's what this guy is like. So they're doing actual role play, I don't know how much, and he doesn't like it. And he said when they're not in combat, he's basically browsing the web. And when they're not in combat, he just like turns on music and listens to that rather than listening to all the conversation going on. So reading that kind of thing, and then when combat goes on, he mutes the music so he said I listen to the combat so I don't like screw up on my turn, but basically if it's not the mechanics of combat, he's not interested. They're doing stuff he's not interested in, which is basically playing a role-playing game. Right? Because you could do the combat with a miniatures game, like a war game, and there's no role-playing involved. So I read this and I thought, okay, well, this guy's a problem player. He admitted he's like on his phone or browsing the web during the game. He doesn't pay attention outside of combat. He's not trying to roleplay at all. I'm not saying everybody's great at roleplay, but you should be at least trying to roleplay if that's what the rest of the group is doing. So reading that, I said, man, you would do them a favor. I mean, I didn't reply to this guy, but I thought you will be doing them a favor if you quit their group. I wouldn't want you in my group because you're not even. It sounds like he's never even tried. Like 2 years you've been in this game. What are you playing for? You don't like anything but the combat, and outside of combat, apparently from the very beginning, he just browses the web and doesn't pay attention. And finally, one of the other players came in there and said, do you really like D&D? Because it sounds like you don't. Because a lot of the stuff you're describing that you don't like doing is this kind of stuff you usually do in D&D. He said there are some groups out there who might perhaps only do combat, but they're few and far between. In most groups, there are 3 pillars: combat, exploration, and social. And most groups do a little of each. And if you're going to only like one of the pillars, well, that's going to leave you on the outs in most groups. But the idea that he's being rude, right, which is what it is when you're like surfing the web when the players are like investigating a mystery or something, that you're listening to music instead of listening to the conversation, that you're only paying attention in combat, I wouldn't want you in my group. So over and above the fact that you're not the steward of other people's fun when you leave the group, and it's okay to leave a group, and the group will probably be fine without you, even if you've been a good player, this guy, in my opinion, is an absolute problem player. I wouldn't want him in my group, and I think his group will be relieved to get him to let him go. I'm surprised they have not called him on this behavior already. Maybe he's been able to hide it. Maybe he's been able to disguise it. He said he just sits back and doesn't say anything during the role play sessions. Maybe, I mean, he seems like I think he's new to D&D, and this is the first D&D campaign he's played. So maybe they figure, well, he's new, so that's why he's not doing a lot of role playing. Um, the new person in my group is the quietest. Now she does do role play a little bit, and she does talk about her character in character a little bit, and so on. But she's not as vocal as everybody else. And I chalk most of that down to the fact that she's not experienced at role playing, and she's not that good at it yet. Even though she's been doing it for 2 years, the rest of us have been doing it a lot longer, and so we're a lot more experienced and therefore generally better at it. And certainly, we don't feel as, let's say, uncomfortable doing it. And I think I was fine from the beginning doing it because, role playing like that because I was a kid when I started. But as an adult, if you're 30 or 40 years old and you've never done it before, and you've never seen it done before, it can feel a little weird to be talking like another person, to be acting like a gnome or a halfling or a barbarian or whatever. Some players like to really ham it up, and that can feel embarrassing. You can feel awkward and uncomfortable trying to do it. And so I'm not surprised that she is the quietest and sort of does the least of the role playing, but she still does some, and she doesn't just sit there and do nothing, right? And it sounds like this guy was sitting there doing nothing the whole time when everybody else was role playing, and I'm surprised that they didn't ask him about it. Are you not having fun? Do you not like it? Something should have occurred to them. I hear a glowy. There it is. Right. It should have occurred to them to question his behavior, to ask him what's going on, and see what the story is. And I'm surprised that nobody's asked him about this up to this point. Is it possible they haven't noticed it? I find that hard to believe, given how hard I was working to stay engaged in my friend's campaign and cover up the fact that I was sort of not having the best time in the world. And I was enjoying it, even with the issues, way better than this guy seems to have enjoyed the game. And my friend, at least, detected that I wasn't having the greatest time in the world and wanted to know what was wrong. So it's hard to imagine that for 2 years, these people have been playing together. This guy's been completely unengaged in anything but combat. He starts browsing the web when they role play and turns on music and doesn't listen to them and doesn't get involved at all, and they haven't noticed what's going on. That's hard for me to imagine that that's true, and I suspect they have noticed. I'm surprised they haven't said anything. But if they have noticed, then my guess is if they've registered his behavior and they realize that he's being rude, my guess is they won't shed any tears for him to leave. And even if they don't realize he's been rude, if he's been a non-entity in anything but combat, and he hasn't role-played at all, and he hasn't helped them solve puzzles or mysteries or any of that, and all he's there is to basically be a body in combat, they're not going to miss him. So even doubly so, it doesn't matter if he quits. But yeah, I read this and I thought, well, okay, it's fine to leave a game group, and you should if you're not having any fun. But I think the reason this guy's not having any fun is because he's being a problem player. He's not, and one of the posters said this, it doesn't sound like you've tried to actually engage with the game and with the content that the DM is providing. And you can't blame the DM that you've never made an effort to let them pull you into the story, right? It sounds like this guy never gave them a chance. Oh, they're role-playing, time to browse Amazon. Oh, they're role-playing, time to turn on Spotify. Oh, they're solving a mystery, time to browse the web. Maybe there's some porn I can find or whatever, right? That attitude meant that he never gave them a chance to interest him in it, to pull him in, to immerse him in the game. And as a consequence, I don't think you can blame the game master. I think this is a player problem, not a GM problem. I don't think there's anything the GM could have done based on his description to immerse this guy and get him more involved in the game, because I don't think he wanted to be, because I think he thinks roleplay is stupid. And so, how can I immerse you in the game by involving your backgrounds or your, family members and characters, coworkers and stuff like that, when you don't care about any of that because you don't role play. So, um, so yeah, I think that you can go ahead and leave a campaign if you don't like it, but also if you're playing in a campaign and you want to have fun, right? You have to participate a little bit. You have to help make the fun. You can't just sit back and say to the GM, deal out the fun like you're dealing out cards, or, like you're passing around slices of pizza for people to eat. It's not like the GM doesn't cook up a meal and then you just eat it passively. It's a two-way street, and you have to give the GM something to work with. And if you don't, you shouldn't be surprised that you didn't have any fun. I think we'll leave it there, guys. We're level 30 now. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.